evening, everybody.
Hi.
My name is Yoetzet Halacha Shifty Friedman.
And I'm Noam Friedman, I guess, Rabbi Noam Friedman.
And we are on a date here to teach and learn together with all of you at our Chavruta date night, thanks to Nishmat and Mizrahi's help and halacha conference. We're happy to be here.
I'll explain a little bit about how this is going to work. There's a lot of different types of sessions that are happening during this conference. This is not going to be a frontal shiur or lecture. Really, we're here to facilitate learning that you can do on your own or with a partner if you've brought one this evening. Really just the idea is to learn and connect with each other. We're going to open up by framing some of the stories that we're going to be studying, but really most of the time will be spent on studying these stories yourself and learning them yourself, and then we'll come back together and share any ideas that you may have. But really the emphasis is just on us framing these stories and you having the opportunity to study them together.
The Talmudic stories that we're going to learn tonight are quite messy. They're not exactly flowery. And you might find in this fantastic conference that we're here to join in together these few days, so many wonderful sessions. And some of them really give you some practical tips on, well, how to improve your relationships. That's the title of, part of the title of our session here tonight, Talmudic Tales to Improve Our Relationships. But we don't think we're going to sort of easily walk away with a top 10 list of tips on how to improve our relationships.
Those are good too. We like those.
Yeah, those sessions are amazing and also have their place, of course. It's just not always so easy to take those out of these Talmudic stories that they kind of cut against the grain. They surprise us a lot. And there's a lot of fun subtleties and irony and some tragic endings.
Oof.
And I think you might, maybe you won't be surprised anymore because we just warned you, or maybe we ruined it. But we do think that you will find many thought-provoking ideas in these Talmudic stories that we'll be studying that will really get to some of the common tensions that you find in a marriage, even in a healthy marriage. You might find these tensions.
And in all relationships.
Right. And many of these ideas can be applied to all relationships for sure. And we do hope that the questions in the study guide that we've provided will give you some really interesting things to talk about with your Chavruta today.
I'll just mention if you're coming solo, so you're welcome to study the sources and look at the study guide questions on your own. But if we're able to pair people and you'd like that, just send us a note in the chat and we'll be happy to do that, as we'll be coming on and off between us framing the sources and mostly private study, then coming back to discuss what our thoughts are. But if you'd like to be paired with somebody, then just send us a message in the chat. As you'll see, I don't know if you've been on other sessions in the conference before now, you probably have, but you'll see on the bottom right, you should see something that says room chat. That's something that everybody will see. So if you type a message there, that'll be shared with the whole group. And there's also a section that says questions and answers, which is something that just us, the moderators, will see. If as you're studying the sources, you have a thought that you want to share with everybody, you can share that in the room chat. And if there's something you want to share directly just with us and we can share with the group, you can send that in the Q&A. And when we come back together, if there are things you'd like to share with everyone and you're brave enough to come on video, we're still sort of working out how the platform works, but we think you have the ability to have other people come on video as well and share. So you're welcome to do that as well.
Great. Well, we'll get started in a minute. You can see the session outline here. We're going to do Chavruta and then a group discussion. We hope that the platform will allow us to have a smooth discussion, even though we're not all in the same room together. And then we'll do another Chavruta with another Gemara, and then we'll have a discussion and wrap up. So you should have access to a PDF with the sources. Does everybody see that? Maybe let us know in the chat.
Just let us know in the chat if you see the PDF of the sources. We're able to share it on our screen, but we did request the option that you could actually access the document independently. So if somebody could just confirm that in the chat, that would be great. No PDF.
No PDF. Okay. You don't see it anywhere?
Okay, you see, okay.
If you do see it, could you maybe describe in the room
I
chat
think,
where people
yeah,
can
I think
see
it says
Thank you.
playlist. Okay, under
Under
attachments.
Okay. So the reason we don't want to just share it is because we want you to go at your own pace. So see if you could find it under attachments.
Okay. Well, at the very least, we'll be able to share it here on the screen, and you can follow along. We'll have to coordinate the timing, but okay, it looks like people were able to figure out how to access it directly. That will allow you to go at your own pace as we toggle back and forth between coming back together and studying this the Chavruta or on our own.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna now put up the next slide. How am I gonna find that? Oh, here it is. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to leave this slide up the whole time of the first Chavruta in case anybody comes late, but I'll also just quickly go over with all of you. That's why it says on the top, welcome to the Chavruta date night, and we're currently learning Chavruta in case anyone sees it when they come on. We are going to start in this first Chavruta session with story 1, Rav Rechume and his wife, which can be found in Masechet Ketubot. And there are questions and prompts for discussion in the study packet. And it's really important to recognize that in this type of learning and learning this type of source that's a story, that there's really no one right way to read the story. And we're really curious to hear what reads all of you have. So don't feel like you're not understanding it the right way, but bring your experiences and your ideas to the text and hopefully to the discussion.
And we'll go off audio. We'll go on mute for the Chavruta portions, although we'll be learning the story together as well. And we encourage you as you go, if you want to share something in the chat, in the room chat with everyone, or in the Q&A, and then we'll come back together in approximately 10 to 15 minutes after we spend the time on the first few sources. So now we're looking at the Gemara in Ketubot, and Shivi, there's a couple other sources there as well, right?
Yeah, so should I describe what sources? I think so. Okay, so first you're going to find Rav Rechume and his wife in Masechet Ketubot. That's the main story. On the second page, you'll continue. We'll give you a good 15 minutes for the Chavruta now. You'll see the prompts and the questions there. But then we're actually going to backtrack and look at the Mishnah and the Gemara that introduces Rav Rechume. We didn't want to share that first because it's really interesting to see the story on its own first. Mm-hmm. But then you're going to see the background and the context, and you're going to say, oh, why did they bring this story up here? What does that tell me about the message that they're trying to share with this story? And then you're going to see two more sources. One is another Gemara that is an interesting parallel to an aspect of the story. And then there's actually a quote from Ruth Calderon's book where she analyzes Talmudic stories. She was a member of Knesset in 2015.
I think she stopped it, yeah.
13 to 15. And she actually made this story very well known. She discussed it publicly. So enjoy. Please enjoy your studying together. Let us know in the chat if you want a Chavruta or want to join our Chavruta.
And we'll come back together in about 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to go off audio. We'll stay on video.
Share your ideas in the chat.
And we'll get back together soon. Happy learning.
Okay, everyone ready to learn this together a little bit?
We're not going to go through everything completely as you just had the opportunity to do, but we want to give everybody the opportunity to share if they want with the group. Now, there is a way to come onto video and share. We don't want to. We have some thoughts on this that we had sort of coming into this, and also some new things that came up as we were just learning it again together now. But we would also love to hear from you. So, how do you? We have a way to we have a way to make people live. I think we have to approve it, so we can do that.
Text in the chat if you do want to share
text us in the chat if you have something that you want to share. Ali, you had some interesting points there about the tier, and if you'd want to come on and say a little more about that on video, just send us a note in the chat, and we can add you to the live stream. And if people would rather not come on and we have to say again, we're not going to give a lecture, but some interesting things that we noted. We are happy
to jump into that. What do you all think, though? I really want to know what they all thought. But
yeah, I'll just say something just because this isn't as the format isn't as natural for like a Zoom thing where there's a bunch of people. So one thing that I'll say is, Shifi, you mentioned before that this story, actually, I think it was the first time that I learned about it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that made it relatively well known, even amongst people who are not big students of the Talmud, was Ruth Calderon, who, as you mentioned earlier, was in the Knesset for a number of years. I looked it up during the break here, and it was, in fact, in the mid-2010s. And Tiffy mentioned she gave a speech about it. So it was actually her maiden speech on the Knesset floor in 2013. She has a PhD from Hebrew in Talmud, and that's her area of expertise and education. And I remember he got up in front of the Knesset and she was talking about, different parts of Israeli society sort of melding together and being able to talk to each other. As somebody who's, I believe she's secular, but obviously very much involved in the world of Talmud. And when she got up, I remember she's like, I want to share the story with you. And she said, I'm going to translate into Hebrew, which would be more understandable to people in the room. She said, I think, if I recall correctly, I haven't watched it in many years. I think she said something like, I want to read it first in the original Aramaic, Bishvil HaMuzika, for the beautiful musical sound that the Gemara has. And one of the things that we were thinking about when we looked at the story was the fact that there's a certain poetic or lyrical quality to the way the story develops.
It really gives a plus the drama.
Yeah,
it's
so dramatic.
That
I think is what we talked on this. Talking about.
Yeah.
So
and maybe the piece of hers that we quoted at the end, maybe you got to also was giving us the chop of the story about his name, Rechume,
right? Her chop of the story.
Yeah, sorry, I did say there's no one right way to read the story, but the fact that his name is Rechume, which means love in Aramaic. Right. What did he love? We see in the story Mashachte Shmata, that the burning was pulling him. Such a powerful phrase. Which is a beautiful thing for the learning to be pulling you.
Right, but obviously, again,
his wife's presence at home wasn't also pulling him.
There are different ways to read the story, but it seems, I think it's fair to say that, we're supposed to look at, certainly the way the story ends, but even before we get there, we're supposed to look at Rav Rechume's particular commitment to the work-life balance or Torah family or Torah spouse balance as being a little bit too extreme. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I can agree to read that in the story.
But one of the things that is interesting to me, I don't know if I realized when I first encountered the story a while ago, is the interplay between the words shechiach and ragil, right? So it introduces, it's at the top of the source here, it introduces that he was shechiach kamed Rava de Machosa, right? And he was a student. He was always in Rava's Beit Midrash in Machosa. So the word shchiach sort of implies that he was commonly there. He was always there. He was regularly there. And ragil is a very similar word, right, which appears on the next line. But the comparison and contrast of he's found all the time in Machosa by Rava, and then he would regularly return home, as if that's also regular.
Almost like Aliyah Regel. 3 times a year we go to the Beit HaMikdash.
The schedule is to go once a year, and on the one hand, in modern colloquial Hebrew, Ragil means something that's regular or normal, but here it kind of has the opposite connotation. He made a habit, right? His pattern, his commitment was that once a year he would go home, and so you have those two words that like on the surface kind of mean the same thing, but the contrast is already quite powerful between where he is all the time and where he regularly visits on an annual basis.
Yeah, the idea of space in the story and what space everybody takes up is so interesting. She's in the home, and he's always in the so by Rava in Mechoza, it doesn't say it first, but the Beit Midrash we think, but then later in the story we see him on the roof of the Beit Midrash. Why is he on the roof? He's not inside, but you made the point that when he falls into the Beit Midrash, which of course is parallel to the tear that's falling from her face, he then finally falls into the building and into the space where he maybe should have been, or he
Right.
wasn't really anywhere where he was supposed to be.
It's not even clear. I mean, we assume that he falls through the roof of the Beit Midrash, but like, why is he on the roof of the Beit Midrash? It almost leaves open the possibility that like he came home, but like he didn't go into the house yet, and he's like still hiding on the roof, which I don't think is shot in the story.
He was on the roof of his home.
Yeah, I don't think it's shot in the story. I think the shot is it's the roof of the Beit Midrash, but it's like, why is he on the roof of the Beit Midrash? And then you have these other stories in Chazal of like almost coming home and then like not coming home, like with Rabbi Akiva, because you hear something. So like here he's home, but like he still can't commit, so he's on the roof, and like maybe the symbolism actually falling into the house. But again, I think the shot is that he's in the Beit Midrash. But in any case, the idea of the symbolism of falling from the place that's out of the home into a physical building, I think is like
really interesting.
A powerful sort of.
And you mentioned Rabbi Akiva. I'll just mention as an aside, that's another great Talmudic story, and that's not our second story. We're going to do a different one. But if you were curious even further about the idea of balancing Torah with marriage and coming home and waiting at home, back and forth between the Beit Midrash and home, that's another really great.
That would be another good study. Yeah, there's a comment here in the chat. I apologize. I was trying to read the previous comment, and the window is so small on our screen that I accidentally deleted it. It's not because I did not like that comment. I was trying to read that comment. So if it gets deleted for you, also please understand that was not intentional. But one of the things that came up in the group chat was the significance of this tier, which, as you mentioned, right, sort of parallel of the falling of both of these things. And then, of course, the other source, which hopefully people have time to look at. Do we want to say a brief word about that and the significance of tiers? Or we should probably move on to the second source.
I'm also looking at this idea that you shared, Ali, here in the chat. Maybe the fall is that grounding moment. Himself out of being hyper focused on learning and realized he messed up, and it's too late because
I mean, the symbolism of that may be that ultimate recognition, and then the tragedy of the story is that only comes with his inevitable demise at the end of the story, and if only he could have had that figurative awakening before crashing through the roof and back down to earth.
Right, and like you said, we could talk more about that tier. We left another source for you there from. That one was in Bava Metzia, right? Nun Tet, where we learned that a husband should be especially careful not to mistreat his wife, since her tear is easily elicited. So that's the English translation. And it's, again, a single tear. So as soon as there's a single tear, I read it as it's a sign that he's mistreated her and it's on him.
And it's interesting.
Sorry for herself? Is she putting that blame on him?
Right. And it's interesting when we get to the next source. I mean, this Gemara, the gender dynamic in the Gemara in Bava Metzia, which I don't know if everybody got to see, which if you just mentioned, one could read that as it's making sort of like a general gender point about men and women and emotions. But as we're going to see in the other story, which is in some ways related and in some ways very different.
Right, we haven't. We imagine you haven't seen that one yet because you said
maybe you took a peek. I know whenever I teach something with a physical source sheet, everyone always goes ahead. So
always very curious.
We have a few students from Columbia and Barnard on here, and I always try and jealously guard the source sheets until the last moment. But inevitably, people are looking at later sources, so you may have seen a little bit of that, and we're going to see that in I think just a moment. How the gender dynamics are reversed in this other story and what that might teach us.
Before we get to the next story, should we just mention the context of Ketubot?
Yes, that's
okay.
important.
So I saw it come up in the chat also. Like we said, we were going to have you read the story, experience the drama, and then and theorize why the Gemara is bringing the story. But when you have the context, I think it's really important to understand that background. So the context of the Mishnah is first it talks about what if what if you vow that you won't sleep with your wife? Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagree, but we'll actually go to the next part. Let me put this slide up, actually.
Oh, yeah, you just flip the page.
One more.
No, I think you had it back there.
Okay.
Too, but the Gemara on top.
Okay, it was.
The Mishnah is on the previous
I'm not even in the right place at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Mishnah is there.
There we go. So, well, there's this exception. Maybe sometimes you can deny your wife this marital obligation of sexual pleasure that a man really has. A woman doesn't have the same obligation for a man. Other sessions at the conference discussed, but we have this statement in the Mishnah: "Talmidim yotzim leTalmud Torah shelo bershut shloshim yom." So for 30 days, you can go and learn without the wife's permission. 30 days. That's a month, and maybe that's a reasonable amount of time. I don't know. Maybe you should always need permission. It's hard to imagine a couple not having that conversation, but that was the Mishnah's, expectation. But then the Gemara goes further just to discuss this and says, well, they discuss other professions and how often they were obligated to be with their wives. But then they bring up, Rav Barona said that Rav said that the halacha is actually in accordance, Rav Adabar Ahava said that Rav said, in the name of Rav, this is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer regarding the one-time measurement. But really, when it comes to Talmidei Chachamim, they actually could go away from home for 2 to 3 years to study Torah without their wife's permission. And Rava said, oh, yeah, the Chachamim did follow this, but it didn't really end so well for everybody. Let's tell you a story about Rav Rechume. And it ended fatally for him because he didn't ask for his wife's permission. Right. It's blaming her, I think.
Right. So that's the framing of the story that, when you're learning the Gemara, you'll see first, but in some ways it can be more fruitful to look at that after you've been exposed to the story.
Right. If you have any other thoughts on this story, we'd love to hear, but we can also come back to it after we see the next story.
Yes, because putting the two stories together can be very interesting. Okay, so we're going to move into our next Chavruta breakout. This is the second main story that we're going to see. The story appears in a bunch of different places in Medrash and Chazal. Right. We've shared with you the version that appears in Rabba, the Medrash,
it's the fullest one.
Yeah. We're not going to get into any academic questions of differences in terms of the different girsot and whatever. No, I don't think so. But instead, we're going to be just studying one of the very fascinating versions of this story about Rabbi Meir. So we'll give everybody another, I would say, 8 to 12
Yeah,
minutes.
This is a 2-page story.
It's a bit of a longer story.
On the 3rd page.
Again, you have the PDF doc there, and so on page 6 is the story number 2 of Rabbi Meir from Vayikra Rabbah, and then the guided questions on page 7. After 8 to 12 minutes, we'll come back again. Feel free again to share any thoughts in the group chat.
I also just want to mention the context of this midrash, both in Vayikra Rabbah and in a different midrash Rabbah. It also came up, and in both contexts, to some extent, the discussion was about shalom, peace, and bringing peace into your home and different aspects of peace. And then we have the story about Rabbi Meir. So that already tells us maybe where it's going, but the story also it's just a lot of fun and interesting, and it also could just take you in kind of different directions. Maybe that's not the main message of the story.
But it will be interested to hear, and we'll probably have some thoughts as well on the story itself, but also sort of putting it in conversation with the first story. So we'll give everybody about 8 to 12 minutes. We'll go on mute again, and we're going to learn the story as well. And feel free again to share any thoughts in the chat, and then we'll come back to it afterwards, and we'll wrap things up.
See you soon. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. We're back. I'll mention again that if anybody has anything that they would like to flag or note about the story and they're learning, please drop it in the chat. And if you'd like, we can also click the live button and you can share it if you're so great.
We'll keep
video.
offering.
We'll keep offering, but it's okay. We're happy to just talk to each other.
Yeah, so we can ask questions and prompts, and you can put things in the chat. We'd love to hear how you think the story compared to the previous, if they came to similar conclusions or not. But maybe we'll get to that question at the end. I'm just putting that out there so you can gather your thoughts.
I think in terms of our own learning just now, I think one of the things that was interesting, especially in comparison to the previous story, is the calendar dates, right? And this idea that Yom Kippur is like an ominous time.
We didn't discuss that before. Why Yom Kippur? Did we?
I don't actually. We may not have. Like, what the significance is of Yom Kippur. And so on the one hand, it's like this. On the one hand, it carries multiple meanings with it. On the one hand, it's the time of tshuva ben adam makah, but also ben adam machavero, and so it highlights and accentuates, the possible interpersonal failings of Rav Rachume. On the other hand, all these dates have connection to the spousal relationship, and specifically, right, the conjugal spousal relationship. Yom Kippur being the one day, at least on a biblical level, where conjugal relations are prohibited.
And that's the day he chose.
And that's the one day that he decides to come home, presumably just in time for Yom Kippur, in the years where he actually makes it home in time. And that fact has to be significant. In addition to the meaning of the time of repentance and what does it mean that that's the one day.
And with this story, it's Friday night, and there's
which also has significance.
A special mitzvah to be together on Friday night. Also, just probably discussed in other shiurim at the conference, and it's not ever an absolute requirement, but there's something to that, and the fact that she was delaying that possibility even and not coming home.
Yeah.
We even noticed the idea of the light going out, where there's a halakha that you're not supposed to have intercourse or haner, and here then, just when the light goes out, she stays. I don't know.
Or by the time she arrives home, it's out, which could have that meaning, could also have the meaning of just a sign of how long she had been away. But
right, certainly that's the basic meaning.
Right.
But
I think it does carry that
extra halacha. There's this real tension under both of these sources that it's time for the couple to be together. And they're not.
What's interesting here in putting the two stories together is how the gender dynamics are flipped in terms of, there are a lot of differences, but one similarity is one member of the relationship is busy studying Torah and is not spending enough time at home. Now, obviously the Rav Rachume version is a little more intense in terms of away 364 days a year, coming home one day a year, and not coming home that one time.
And it's the more classic version. It's the Rabbi Akiva running away for the 12 years.
Correct. But this one is just seems like a weekly thing. Could be that Rabbi Meir gives shorter drasha on other weeks, and she's home in time. So it's less extreme here, but it's also interesting to see the gender dynamics flipped, where here it's the wife who's going out and learning Torah, and then when she comes home, it's the husband who is distraught about her absence.
Right. It is really surprising and interesting, and you almost wonder, can you understand him when she comes home late? We understood Reb Rachume's wife with that poor, sad single tear falling, and
even though his response seems a little irrational and ridiculous,
right?
There
she
is
went
a
out
part
for one cheer, and you're snapping at her,
And I mean, we don't have time to talk about all of these things, but also the content of what he tells her to do, right? It could be just in a fit of rage, he says, do this ridiculous thing. But also,
let's talk about the spitting.
Gender dynamics are such that this is his wife with a male rabbi, and it's almost like there's this jealousy there. And the only antidote for him to feel better is this, public humiliation of and sort of repudiation of whatever teacher-student relationship may have existed between them. Now, it may or may not have been appropriate of him to read into that relationship. Presumably, on the face of it, she likes hearing his drasha.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that.
There's no indication otherwise.
So I think we're inclined to read this as being a case of extreme jealousy.
In the other story, the other woman is the shmata, the learning, the Torah itself is other woman in a sense.
Yeah.
And there's no, I don't know. I don't see the jealousy in it really as much. Yeah. But what's so fun about the way what Rabbi Meir does in this story is he turns around the husband's request on him and is able to sort of satisfy all parties.
Right.
It's a real. I think that's the surprise twist of this story.
Yeah.
Right.
She gets called up thinking that she has some sort of healing powers that she doesn't know she has, and only after does she realize that this was a setup. And she's able to bring that. What's interesting is we don't get the end of the story here. We have the story ends as many stories in Chazal do as Rabbi does X, students see X happening and ask Rabbi, why did you do that? And the lesson is in what the Rabbi tells the students, which I think is a primary lesson here. He's a seeker after peace. It's almost reminiscent of some of the stories in Chazal about Aharon HaKohen trying to create peace between people, including between spouses who are fighting.
By telling them each different thing.
But because, because that's the end of the story, we don't actually know what happens when she goes home. And presumably this answer was satisfactory, but she in her head now knows that this was a setup and that she could now present to him, I did what you asked, even though she knows that to other people it looked like she was doing something else and not humiliating Rabbi Meir and instead killing him.
And then when she gets home, she could say to her husband, I did what you asked.
Right.
But really, she knows, she has the satisfaction that she didn't disgrace her teacher.
Right. Someone brought up in the chat here that it's the neighbors that sort of realize. Let's scroll down here. Yeah, it's the neighbors that realize it's a setup, and she doesn't really pick up on that. And the role of the neighbors in the story is quite interesting because it's a sort of intermediary you don't have in the other story where the couple is sort of like not on talking terms, and the neighbors sort of play this mediating role of saying, hey, you got to work this out, and whatever it is that they think about the nature of the dispute, right, they need to be saying, you got to work this out. And one way to read the story is to say the husband's demands are not reasonable and this is unfair and she didn't do anything wrong. I guess the neighbor's perspective either doesn't see it that way or says, yes, that may be true, but it's worth sort of overcoming that, even though it means disgracing this Torah figure, if it's going to repair the relationship between them. And that's how Rabbi Meir totally feels.
Right, and I'll just mention this story is actually, the context is about shalom, but it's also brought in relation to the sota, and the ending is referencing a pasuk about the sota. His students say to him, how could you be treated with such contempt? And he says, well, it's because I'm like my maker, like God, which is like this kind of arrogant thing. But then he brings it back and says, because just like God could be disgraced, I can also be disgraced. So that's another fun twist. I think Rabbi Meir plays a really strong role here. So yes, he helps bring the shalom, but there's also that irony of his role in bringing the shalom in a roundabout way. So
we're just about out of time. I'll close with the following thought. So on one level, these are just stories that should be framed learning together, right? These are not like cute little takeaways. These are stories that have a lot of intrigue and scandal and tragedy. And, you know, on one sort of surface level, they give you ideas of like what not to do. And like, obviously, right, the balance is not right in these stories between commitment to other pursuits, in this case, Torah, and the relationship. But I think precisely because of that, I think what these stories help us to see and what they underline and accentuate is the fact that like this tension is supposed to exist on some level, right? That commitment to Torah is supposed to be there. And maybe in other cases, it's other personal, spiritual ambitions, professional ambitions, like that should be a healthy tension within the relationship.
We need to have other things that we're passionate about.
But like these are stories of where the balance is all wrong, but I don't think they're repudiations of the entire notion of having that tension. And I think for both this woman in the second story and for Rabbi Hume, like the idea is that like, yes, you have your familial obligations and you have your interest in your own personal growth, in this case in Torah, and you need to balance those things. These are obviously not the right balance, but it's important to have those sort of personal goals within the relationship and balance them and, you know, together in the context of the relationship. So that's one thing I could leave us with. And not to get too meta, I think hopefully one thing we did together tonight is for those of us who are studying with a partner to be able to learn Torah together and achieve both goals. But one thing I would sort of just leave you with as a charge for going forward is to figure out what are those things in your own life or in your own relationships where you should sort of feel that productive tension between different things, and how do you get that balance together? So thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
It's such a thrill learning with all of you. Feel free to leave a final thought in the chat. And have a great night. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Have a great night. And don't forget to come home before Yom Kippur.